Hello. Thank you for listening. This is the near death experience of Donald, and this experience occurred in 1972. Open quote. In the summer, prior to entering the fifth grade, I fell from our backyard tree. It had been infected with the spruce budworm disease. The limb that I had been swinging from let go, and I fell approximately 15 feet. I broke both arms, with my left arm being severely injured. I also impacted mud into my nose and throat. The lawn and bare ground around the tree was wet from rain from the prior night. Initially, as the branch snapped, I started to fall. I was surprised to be caught midair by a bright, glowing being, which carried me upwards. Upon reaching a glowing, bright landscape, I was released. I became quite euphoric and joyous. I immediately recalled jewels floating everywhere. As I moved my hand around them, I came to the awareness that I was flying and floating above our house. I had a wide-angle view and began looking at the lighthouse from the rooftop. I remember laughing at what my mom would say if she saw me on the top of our three-story home. I remember looking into the second-story window of my parents' bedroom. At this point, I started to hear someone calling my name, but this voice was saying Donald, not Donnie, which everyone used, including my parents. I ignored the voice until a very stern woman's voice said it again. At this point, I turned and saw a tall, square-jawed, heavy, and slightly overweight woman in a yellow flower-patterned sundress. I asked her who she was, and she said, "I'm your grandmother." None of this was spoken in human language because I never saw her lips move. When I said, "No, you're not," I know what my gram looks like, and it's not you. At this point, I had only my paternal grandmother living, and that was the grandmother I was talking about. She then said, "All mothers have a mother, and that mother has a mother. I am one of those." And she said that, as she said this, in my mind, I saw little pictures going back each generation. I noticed her image there 2 or 3 generations back. I reached out and took her hand, and she smiled. As we walked, I asked her where we were, and was somewhat surprised with her reply of heaven. In a peculiar way, I seemed to doubt her, and I said, "If I'm in heaven, then I want to see Jesus." I was even more surprised when she said, "Okay." As we moved on, I realized the area around us had changed, and I was aware of a glowing building, for lack of better words. As we moved, I was aware that I thought it must be a library because people were reading and learning. In one room, I was surprised to see an Indian who, as I thought that, a very annoyed reply came from the elaborately painted and feathered individual. "I am not an Indian. I am a question mark." I have often thought of what he must have said. I remember how he was dressed and think he was one of the South American native tribes on the line of the Mayans, but remember only being bewildered and replying, "Look like an Indian to me." A little ways later, after seeing other beings reading and learning, my gram stopped and said, "Wait here." She would let Jesus know I was here. I remember that I thought I was outside the school's principal office. Oddly, I seemed to slightly hear the conversation in this office as him on the telephone. After the short wait, I seemed to hear the phone receiver set down just prior to him saying, "Yes, okay, right, goodbye." Then I got very nervous as I saw movement, a bright glow moving to the opening. I would have to say that at this point that I was awestruck. At this point, the light, capital L, was too much, and I humbly lowered my head. I never got a clear view of this being my mom had talked so much about. This would be the part that bothered me the most when I started to relive it later on. My gram, at this moment, said what I thought was, Yes, you are a man. This is Donald. I was confused as to why she didn't just say, Jesus, this is Donald, but was too busy trying to understand why he was so bright. I even tried to look through my slightly opened fingers to get a glimpse. While I struggled to see, I remember him saying very little to my gram. All of a sudden, I was aware he was searching or maybe viewing my childhood up until that point. I remember him stopping at a memory of mine of which I was ashamed. I saw the event, the theft of a toy rubber knife from a Main Street department store, from a different angle. I saw me from a distance, running out of the loading dock door and home. It was all from a distance and detached. He paused slightly to see my reaction, and with no judgment, whizzed through the rest. After this, my gram and he talked. She turned to me and said, "You have to go back." I think I even surprised myself when I said, "No, I want to stay here." Graham said that would make my family very sad because they love me very much. I said, "No, they don't," and was told to look. As I looked down through what I thought was a television, I could see my sister and my brothers trying to revive me. My older sister was digging the mud out of my throat and nose. I was surprised. I could hear them saying, Donnie, breathe, please," as she slapped my face. Then my gram bent down and, while on one knee, turned me around and looked me straight in the face. With her hands on my shoulders, she said the words that would haunt me. "Donald, you've got to go back. But remember, you are part of something very important." As I turned to look again at what was happening with my body, being confused as to what my gram meant, and before I could inquire, I felt a huge push from behind. I fell headlong into the limp body and started gasping for and gulping air. The pain was awful. I started to relate what had happened, but no one believed a word. Over time, even I forgot. Sounds impossible, but when all your family tells you you're mistaken, even you start to believe it. So back into the back of my mind it went. I was married for 8 years and having the last of our 4 children born when this all started coming back to me in dreams, hearing certain things, and then my brother tells me the Hebrew name for Jesus was Yeshua. Boom. What a lot of memories then. I didn't get to tell my mother the whole story until she was in the hospital and had only 2 weeks to live. She made me promise to tell my siblings, all 7 of them. When I finally told my wife, she said, "Honey, I can see why you never told anyone. You were afraid no one would believe you." I laughed aloud and was surprised to hear myself say, "No, dear, I didn't tell anyone because I didn't believe it. Because after years of being an atheist, it didn't have a place." I'd like to end by saying that I've tried over the last 5 years to tell people this event. Even now, when I get to the point where Yeshua comes out to greet me, I get that same rush of emotions. It gets me crying and embarrassed. I think that's why when they asked me if I knew my mother and family loved me, I said no, not like this. It seems that love in the physical sense is nothing compared to real love. End quote. That was a beautiful story. There are some questions at the end. There are a couple questions at the end. How did your highest level of consciousness and alertness during the experience compare to your normal everyday consciousness and alertness? It was more conscious and alert than normal. At one point, I knew that even the walls loved me, that the plants, the ground, and air were there for me. I remember flying and realizing how easy and effortless it was. All I needed to do was put my attention to a spot and glide. My mother nailed my window shut because on more than one occasion, I was going to show her how easy it is. Communication seemed effortless, almost telepathic in many ways. It was richer. Please compare your vision Answer: vision seemed to be like through a wide-angle lens. At one point, while watching everyone rushing to my aid, I was also aware of a gentleman looking into the engine of a car across the lawn next door, who also ran over to me a good 100 yards away. Question: did you pass through a tunnel? Answer: uncertain. There was a short movement initially while being carried up by a bright entity. Later, I would have this in a dream and with future event knowledge included. Question: did you encounter or become aware of any deceased or alive beings? Answer: yes. I recently was given photographs after my mother died in 2009, and in the group was a photo of my maternal grandfather's maternal grandmother. She died in about 1913. This looks like the grandmother that took care of me during my out-of-body NDE. Question: did scenes of the future come to you? Answer: scenes from the world's future later on, after this event. Things started returning to my memory. Additional information not initially available to me, which included floods that have occurred and the death of a neighbor's father. Question: did you come to a border or point of no return? Answer: I came to a barrier that I was not permitted to cross. I was told that I would have no choice but to return. That was against my apparent wishes. Question: what was your religion prior to your experience? Answer: Christian Protestant. My family was Baptist, and early in life, including the time of my accident, we participated in Sunday services. But as my siblings entered puberty, there came a persistent materialistic atheistic overtone. Have your religious practices changed since your experience? Answer: yes. Never is my spiritual focus too far away from whatever is happening or what appears to be happening. Question: what is your religion now? Answer: Buddhist. I closely connect with Tibetan Buddhism, in which Saint Isa is honored. A healthy, non-dualistic view. Question: did your experience include features consistent with your earthly belief? Answer: both consistent and not consistent. I grew up with Jesus, and at 10 had no knowledge that the name we used was just a translation, and was bewildered when just by chance that my younger brother brought up the issue. It's hard to put into words what happened the first time my ears heard his Hebrew name over 25 years after the event. Question: did you have a change in your values and beliefs because of your experience? Answer: yes. My wife says she has been married to 2 different men, both the same guy. She married a militant atheist and now is married to someone who quotes Jesus with much fondness. Question: did you seem to encounter a mystical being or presence or hear an unidentifiable voice? Answer: I encountered a definite being. See my story above. I encountered several unearthly beings in the library. Initially, upon falling, I was carried up by one of and the contact with the light of the world. Question: during your experience, did you gain information about the meaning of life? Answer: uncertain. The most striking part was the moment prior to being pushed back to my body, and my grandmother took the time to come face to face with me and even got down to the level of a 10-year-old and say to me, quote, Donald, remember, you are a part of something very important. Question: what life changes occurred in your life after your experience? Answer: large changes in my life. Large changes. Most of my adult life I lived as an atheist and loved to dig at the Bible and quote the less than uplifting passages, and Jesus was my favorite punching bag. Even when memories of the NDE started coming back, I would push it away, ignore it. It wasn't real, it couldn't be, but over and over, that immense love kept showing itself. It shook me. With that, I found out I was just wrong about my view of life after death, and I needed to admit it. Question: was the experience difficult to express in words? Answer: yes, because so much of the communication and interaction was emotion-based. To tell someone Then Yeshua, in extreme brilliance, entered and stood in front of me, pales in content to the magnitude of feeling that came with that light. Light that lives and moves, that senses and expresses. Most times at the start of sharing that moment, I would seize up and stop and end right there. I still have trouble with that moment. The Bible called him the light of the world, and that is a gross understatement. That's exactly my point. Question: how accurately do you remember the experience? Answer: I remember the experience more accurately than other life events. I have to say I remember very little at that time, but flashbacks of this event 20 years later pushed it through and into permanent memory. Question: what did you believe about the reality of your experience shortly after it happened? Answer: I must have thought it was real at the time, but shortly after it became apparent that no one wanted to hear, so life just took off and we went our merry way, not believing in much of anything non-physical. Question: what do you believe about the reality of your experience? Answer: the experience was definitely real. It's hard to put into words. Again, it's the immense feelings that drove the experience home, if you will. Without those feelings, there would be very little to say. And to say I stood in front of Yeshua and we viewed my life up to that point says very little because so much was conveyed without conversation. I'm fortunate in that I know what ultimate love for someone is. I felt it. I experienced it, all caps. I know what it is. He and I shared it. For that, I am thankful. End quote. What a nice story. There's going to be some questions that I put in the comments if you want to give your responses to them. There were some really neat things. Another time when he snapped, the tree limb snapped, and he's caught in the air, and all of this occurs before he hits the ground, probably, or very, very close to when he hits the ground. And then when he meets his grandmother, and she says, well, I'm not necessarily the grandmother you think, there's other mothers have mothers, and those mothers have mothers. And then he sees little pictures going back generations, so he has that ability to do that. Right there was totally interesting. His grandmother and her interactions with Jesus were interesting. That was another time another grandmother and Jesus were involved, kind of, in that life review or coming together and reviewing that. That's pretty interesting. And then having the memory of the event go dormant for so many years, and then with just one word, Yeshua,